Hello. It's a small dog. Hey, Rosalie. How's small turtle? Good. Oh, awesome. You have video and pictures, right? You can unmute your microphone for a second if you want.
He just seemed like he wanted privacy, so.
Well, I'm glad you respected it.
Yeah, he's really happy. It's pretty cute.
That's awesome. I loved your one with it in the eggshell because they can actually eat eggshell too. So if he wanted it, that would be fine. That was
Yeah.
really clever.
He doesn't want to eat it. He's super picky. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna work through that with him.
Remind me how you got him.
I adopted him from Nan Arthur. I did my KPA with Nan Arthur,
Oh, cool.
and yeah, and she raised him.
Oh, awesome.
She got him for her granddaughter. He's
Mhm.
7 years old. Junior's 7 years old, and she just kind of felt like nobody in her family was really that interested in him. So, and she loves him, but she kind of saw that I was gonna, you know, be a good turtle mom, I guess.
Yeah. You found Rachel Rhett through us on Instagram, yeah?
Through Facebook.
Oh, okay, cool. Because I remember seeing you on Instagram and messaging you and be like, hey, you should join this group.
Yeah. I think I found it through your Facebook, through Taking Wing Facebook.
Oh, cool. Awesome. That makes me really excited.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, I've actually been finding a bunch of people through Instagram and like messaging them being like, hey, you should be a part of this group that I run. And
That's so smart because it's different people. It seems.
yeah, totally. And it's like we've gotten like I found Jim through there, and Jim does all that really cool play gyms for his carpet pythons, and they like hang out in the ceiling and stuff, and super cool.
Awesome.
So yeah. And I'm glad you've been able to figure out, like, I mean, I know it's a snake class, but I'm really glad you took it and are being able to adapt stuff to him. I'm really happy about that. I was kind of like, oh no, I hope I hope she gets something out of it for Junior.
Oh, totally. Especially thinking about stress and stuff like that. Stress signals, stress behaviors.
Yeah, totally. We're talking about doing one on tortoises and stuff.
Ooh.
So
Yeah.
stuff's in the works.
Do that. That'd be awesome. Okay, I'll unmute.
Sorry, my internet dropped out right as I was logging in. But I think we're golden now.
Golden.
Okay. Yes, please do one on tortoises. All right, Steph, we've got your vote.
Cool. Well, I might just have to get a few more tortoises then. Or turtles. I'd be cool with turtles. I just don't like cleaning like fish tank situations.
So cool watching them swim, though.
I know.
So many fun behaviors to do and see.
There's an Instagram, Beerus and Goku, and she takes her box turtle out and he like runs through her like lawn whenever there's rain and like forages in the stuff. It's really cool.
That's super cool.
Okay.
All right. Are we ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let's do this.
Welcome to Foundation Snake Training Week 4.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Homework. Really nice job, everyone, on the homework this week. I really like what you're doing, but I really like too the observations that we're seeing. So I like how you're taking that data and assessing it on your own. Hey, I would like to do this again, or I'd like to do this again, but, or I'd like to do this again, and I like all those observations that we're coming to, and the body language that we're seeing, and the new behaviors, right? We're always looking to see, are we spurring any behavior that we haven't seen before? And how can we encourage that and motivate that so we get that diversity in behavior? Granted that it's a positive behavior that we're seeing
Yeah.
and not a stress behavior. But for the most part, we are seeing really positive behavior of snakes doing different dynamic things, and that's really cool. So keep up the great work. If you ever have questions about how to approach something or that kind of thing, definitely reach out. I know a lot of homework came in later in the week, so you may have got feedback a little bit later as well. So definitely, if you feel like something wasn't clear, give us another reply in there, and we'll come back to it again. So
Yeah.
good job on
Yeah,
that.
I know there's a few more replies that I just haven't gotten to that I'll get to, that we will get to after the class today.
And if you didn't get a chance, I think we got almost everybody's. If you didn't get a chance to do it and you still want to do it, definitely there's no rule saying you can't do it. So definitely you can still do it. And even if you want to hold off on this week's homework and do last week's homework, that's fine. So the deadlines are there to help us all, but we don't want them to be a stress.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so this week we're gonna jump. Oh, did you want to take this one?
No, this is my favorite topic ever.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. You can take it.
Go.
Yeah, like this is my favorite topic ever. And I think we've been really, it's like, I know that it's like training snakes is the course, but also the foundations in training snakes, because all of the stuff we've been doing is leading up to how do we get behavioral diversity and how do we set them up to be presented with novel stimuli, like a target stick, like a crate, like a station, or anything like that, which are things that I think currently I've been really pleasantly surprised by everyone in this class, and that like most of you guys are doing a lot of really cool advanced stuff already. But I think standardly in the hobby of keeping snakes, or the way that they're traditionally, their husbandry has been maintained, there isn't as much focus on how do we how do we assess stress and what is actually stressful. And so I think it was really important that we got through all the forging puzzles and all that kind of stuff, because I think that is really the key to kickstarting training, and everyone's been doing super well with that. So yeah, let's go.
Yeah, so with that, let's look at the definition with operant conditioning. So a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishments for behavior. Through operant conditioning, an individual makes an association between a particular behavior and a consequence, right? So we're not just looking, it's not that living thing, that learner just got something nice, that they've actually built that association, that their behavior led to getting that thing, right? Or it could work the other way, that their behavior led to that punisher, right? So we're changing whether if they like what their behavior accomplished, then they're more likely to do it again. If they don't like what their behavior accomplished, they're less likely to do it again. So we want to be mindful of both as we're going forward, and we start to actually look. Now we're looking at, we're not just introducing motivators to behavior, we're actually going to try to introduce contingencies, and we want to be mindful of if is behavior increasing or decreasing, because if it's decreasing, we might not be doing what we think we are, right? So we might actually be punishing the behavior we want, or something else might be more reinforcing, and both of those pieces of information are really valuable to moving forward. So within, when we're moving into that operant area, we're really looking for those associations to be made. My behavior caused X, my behavior led to X.
And this is Skinner's definition of operant conditioning. So if you don't know B.F. Skinner, who I just found out his name was Burrhus Frederick Skinner, so I understand why he goes by B.F. So he is, often referred to as like the father of operant conditioning, which I'm kind of curious to see what he would think about that, because obviously scientists just discover things that are already there. So operant conditioning has been a part of life forever. But if you're not familiar with Skinner, I would totally do some research on him. And a lot has been discovered since him, because he passed in 1990. But he still kind of like got the ball rolling, and he wrote some pretty intense stuff. And he like did most of it from, other than his labs, he did most of it from the basement of his house, which I found out recently.
Is rad, right? We don't always need like the best newest stuff. Although having the best newest stuff is really fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go through, in addition to looking at training strategy today, we're also gonna look at some tools and how we can use them and how maybe we've used them in the past. So these same questions we can apply to that, to those tools, to tell us, is the animal viewing this in a positive light? Are they perhaps viewing this as an aversive? What is it doing to behavior? Are we stopping behavior? Are we changing behavior? Are we encouraging a behavior? So we can apply this to any stimuli that we introduce, and our tools fall within stimuli. It's something that we're introducing into that environment. Our tools can also function as a cue. And so we can always ask these questions. In addition, we can really focus our laser in what happens immediately before we see that behavior, what happens immediately after that behavior, and those pieces of information are going to be the most valuable to us in modifying behavior and seeing what is motivating, what is reinforcing. And then, I mean, it's just a super valuable question to always ask ourselves. A lot of times with training, and I don't know per se that's the case with a lot of the goals I'm seeing in this set of students in your class, because a lot of you, I think, are looking to be proactive and sort of increase behavior. You're not looking to do things like, I want to stop him biting me. I want to stop them striking at me. I want to stop them doing X, Y, Z. I think a lot of us are already in that mindset, but it's always a good question to have in the back of my mind. If I want a behavior to stop, what do I want the learner to do instead? Right? Because there are 100 other things that they could do if we stop this behavior, and who's to say that they're going to pick the one that we want? So it's good to have that in our frame of mind when we want to stop a behavior. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah.
I figured you did. So
I know. I just don't want to, like, I feel like I don't want to make things run on too long. But I actually, what I want to say is that it's just, that's actually a really awesome point that I hadn't even really considered. And that is that I haven't seen a whole lot of questions about how do I stop this. It's all, most of the questions have been like, how do I get this, right? How do I get movement? How do I get behavior? How do I get all those things? And thinking of, you know, the how do we know it's training or strategy full, and that part of what do we want the learner to do instead. A huge part of that is not asking for dead man behaviors. So what we call a dead man behavior is we should have had a slide on this. A dead man behavior is, or a dead dog behavior, depending on who you're talking to, is a behavior that can be performed by someone who is dead. So like if we're asking for, if we're asking a dog to not jump, well, dead dogs can do that too. So we need to think about, what do we want instead? What we want instead is actually, we probably want all four paws on the ground. So I can't reinforce something that's not happening. I have to reinforce something that is happening, which is a huge part of that. What do I want them to do instead? As opposed to just stop this, I want this versus, which actually can be pretty hard for a lot of people, especially in consulting. It's like, well, I just don't want my bird to scream. I'm like, well, what do you want him to do instead? Which is sometimes actually a really hard question if you're not thinking about it.
And then we just wanted to touch on this really quickly before we jump further into other tools, because food is one thing that we're using to get and reinforce behavior. Likely at this point you don't have to, but usually for the sake of getting repetitions efficiently, food is a really good choice. So we might start doing things like preparing our prey a little bit differently, using different kinds of prey. So I just wanted to just, let's talk about this a little bit really quickly. We want to use human food safety guidelines when we are defrosting food. I think almost all of us, if not all of us, are using frozen thaw. If you are using pre-euthanized or something like that, maybe this doesn't apply quite as much, but there would be different set of standards probably. So this is kind of applying to if you're going to defrost meat. The safest way to do it is in the fridge, even if you're defrosting a bigger prey item, and that might take a couple of days. If you don't have that time, it actually safer than putting it on the counter or putting it just in a static bowl of water is to have running cold water on it. That's going to continually bring more cold water in. So it's taking the heat away faster, because what happens when we're defrosting something is the outside can get warmed faster than the inside, and it can get to unsafe levels, and we can have bacteria starting to form on the outside, even though parts of it are still frozen. There's just something to keep in mind. Once it's completely defrosted, that's when you want to heat it up. So if you start heating it in warm water, again, that same thing can happen. You can have parts of it that are at an unsafe temperature as far as for bacteria growth, and parts of it that are cold still. So you want to completely defrost, then heat it in the warm water. As far as for prepping, we got into a little bit last week as far as how to prep rodents, especially kind of in the most efficient way or the easiest way, and avoid making it too messy and get it to pieces that are easy to give, right, and easy to eat. So sometimes it's going to be easier to start to prep when the prey is still frozen, and then you can go through the other steps. So actually prep it, put it in the fridge, defrost it completely, then you can bring it out, warm it up, and start. And then anything you don't use, so sometimes maybe you'll abandon your training plan. You'll go, oh no, they're not having it today. So a strategy that we use a lot is to then offer a puzzle feeder instead. So plan B.
I'll usually have one sitting by just in case.
And yeah.
Or I'll use it to get them back in the enclosure. Like I'll wait till I've got like 3 reinforcers left or 3 pieces left, and then call the session, put it in the puzzle, and then put them back in the enclosure, and that usually gets them to go back in.
And if for some reason you need to abandon altogether, I think probably most of us are already doing this. Maybe we have other snakes to use it, or other reptiles, or whatever the case may be, we might have another contingency, but we don't want to refreeze it. So if maybe they're in shed and you're like, okay, yeah, they're not having anything today, you could theoretically still offer a puzzle or some sort of enrichment, and they might engage with it even if they don't eat. So if you don't have something else to feed, that might be a good option. You know, just turn around and use it to scent something or create some other type of enrichment. But we don't want to refreeze it and use it again, even though it might be tempting, because I put all this work into prepping this and it's ready to go and I don't want to waste it. But we want to stay safe when we're doing our training. So just a note on that.
One thing on that real quick.
Yeah.
Since I've been feeding this little like 14-inch rainbow boa, I've been using pinkies, and what I have found is that if you heat them up slightly too quickly, like I'll thaw them and then I'll put them near a heat lamp or something like that just for a few minutes, but if they heat too quickly or I get distracted by a rabbit or probably a chicken, but something running by, I've noticed they start to explode, which is disgusting. And also now you can't use it. So that's something to be considerate of too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stephanie.
Yeah. So just when you're using warm water, you're using warm, not super boiling. And,
right.
Especially with pinkies, I think it is a little bit easier to use like a light or a heater or something, because it's literally going to take a few seconds. But yeah. There's definitely that danger of. I'm
just saying that this happened to me recently, so I figure I might as well put that out there. Just be super focused when you're thawing something.
They're stuck to the ceiling. Oh.
Well, no, I just mean like, you know.
Yeah. All right. So by the same token, a lot of us might be presenting the same prey items in a different way than our learners are used to, or we might be trying totally new food items as well. Reptilinks would be an example. Maybe some of us want to try some type of bird or eggs. So if you want to use a variation, sometimes it's not the best to choose a training session to introduce those foods. Sometimes it's better to just kind of see how they're going to respond first. I know with some snakes, we might get very few interactions. So maybe we're trying to build a relationship with this really shy snake and we literally get one chance a week. And then, you know, they need to decompress before we try again. So if you do want to attempt to use it in a training session, I would definitely follow some of these. If these are good to follow, even if you're not going to, if you're going to present it in a puzzle or something like that. But one really effective way is to make it smell the same. So pair that old food with the new food.
I'll just thaw them together in the same container.
It's a really easy way to do that. We can also try to make it look the same. So I was working with some monitors that were on a diet. I think this is a trend for Savannah monitors that they're perpetually on a diet. But I was working with some monitors that they were prescribed by the veterinarian that they could only have earthworms now because they were on the strict diet, but they had previously gotten all rodents. They were a confiscation. And so we took the tiniest little shred of white fur off of rodents that we were prepping for raptors, and we would put that on the worm, and that visually was enough that they go, okay, that's food. And they recognize that as food. So it's just helping them to build that approximation of recognizing that that's still food. By the same token, if we're trying to establish, and I think we talked about it a little bit last week, establish taking static food versus moving food. Again, we can offer approximations in that. So maybe we offer it close to where we're going to offer it statically. It's also good to try to do both smell and looks, so visual. So we get the olfactory presentation as well as the visual, so they can see, yes, that looks like food, yes, that smells like food. And then behavioral momentum, especially as we're getting into offering multiple prey items a little bit more frequently. If you can get them to take, you know, 2 or 3 of something that you know that they like, this can backfire, so we'll get into that in troubleshooting. But if you can get them to take something that you know that they like, sometimes you can then introduce that new one and then go again to things that you know that they like and kind of sandwich it. You have to be careful with that, so I'll give a caveat to that. I would try to make sure that your approximations are close, that it looks and smells pretty close to the real thing, the thing that they're used to. Because if it's too different, they might look at you like, I did the thing, you're supposed to give me the thing, that's not the thing.
And also if they found the smell of the new food aversive, you actually might be punishing the behavior, which is not helpful when you're trying to get a behavior.
Yeah, and even if you're not building a contingency, it can still affect your relationship. Just to, if they're expecting something and they get something else, but how you can sometimes build momentum if it looks close enough to the thing they're used to. So that could be a good strategy. Do you have something to add there? Okay. Okay, so we're going to dive into tools a little bit. Here's just a few different examples of tools. There's a feeding cup there, a cup on a stick. There's a couple different target sticks and some different feeding tongs. So looks like here there's some plastic or, oh, there's, can you check the chat?
Yeah. Being asked, let's actually cover this question real quick before we work on tools. So Scott and Veronica, I think Veronica's usually the only one there, but is asking, can you please define build a contingency? So when we're talking about building a contingency, we're talking about creating an event that happens before a behavior. So the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. So what we're talking about is either reinforcing or punishing a behavior, right? So we're presenting target, snake touches target, snake gets food. So that is a contingency. So the contingency is all three of those things. It's what happens before, what they do, and what happens after. So building a contingency would be different than conditioning, because a conditioning wouldn't, or classical conditioning would not contain a consequence. It would just be pairing, and we're going to talk about that later. But yeah, so we're building a behavior's frequency or infrequency based on what happens after. Does that answer your question, Veronica?
Whoops.
That's okay. We can keep talking, and then I'll see if I can just message after.
Okay. So yeah, we see some different...
If you have more questions, just let me know, and we can talk about it in the group.
Different target sticks and different kinds of tongs. So we're going to talk about some of these different tools. Okay, so snake hook, most of us have used one, seen one used, have an understanding and general idea of how to use one, or have used one. So let's talk about some different ways that we can use this particular tool. I feel like I should have one here, sorry. My ESL t-shirt hat is coming on and I need props. But we can use this to increase the distance between us and the learner, right? So either as a block, visual block. So how does that work? Well, usually we're applying some type of pressure, right? So they are wanting to avoid the hook. So if they're wanting to avoid it, then we are looking at it's either a punisher or a negative reinforcement. So their behavior, they want to get away from the pressure. Getting away from the pressure is reinforcing, and so we've reinforced the behavior of moving away from the hook.
It's
applying
the
pressure.
Same thing that's happening when a herding dog is moving towards sheep. The sheep move not because the herding dog is necessarily actually touching them or biting them. They're moving because they want to create distance between them and the herding dog.
So one thing to be mindful too is, and I know a lot of us, or a few of us anyway, working even in this class, don't know the complete learning history of our learners.
Mm-hmm.
So we are new to those animals. So one thing to keep in mind, if you don't know their history, they can generalize that to a lot of different stick-like things. So when you go to start introducing other things, you may initially get a moving away. So we're going to talk about some ways to deal with that, but let's just look specifically at this tool for now. You could potentially condition a snake hook to be a more positive thing. I have seen snakes that literally do not move when they are picked up with a snake hook. They've been picked up so many times, mostly I've seen it with rattlesnakes, older rattlesnakes. So you can get a habituation to it. I'm not scared of that anymore. But the thing that's hard with habituation and desensitization and all of these different things where we're looking for behavior to kind of go down is how do we measure what's happening? How do we know if that animal has gone into learned helplessness and there's nothing I can do about this, so I'm just going to let it happen? Or
like
if they
we talked about flooding last week.
Yes. Or if they actually don't care. So we're not getting a stress response. So with learned helplessness, there's still stress internally. They're just not an outward sign. And so it's really hard if we don't put it in the picture of the rest of their behavior to know what's actually happening. Are they just giving up? Or do they actually have pretty low stress in relation to that? So something to keep in mind when we're using it as a lifting moving tool. And I think it's important too to realize we have other options too a lot of times. No, I know with venomous, sometimes we have limitations, especially when in our facilities. But just to be mindful of what's actually happening when I use that tool. What box am I in? What scientific strategies of behavior change are in play when I'm using that hook, just to be mindful of it. Tap training is another one that we can look at that we use the snake hook for. A lot of times also we're using something else for it, right? Maybe we're just using a dowel or a net or a paintbrush or whatever we're using. We're wanting a lot of times to stop behavior, right? Hey, don't strike, don't look for food, don't look for anything. I'm just going to be over here doing this or XYZ, right? So it can be a positive punishment. It can be a stop behavior, decrease behavior. It can be a negative reinforcer. So, hey, move away from it. Move away from it, and the pressure goes away, right? Negative reinforcement. Or you can get learned helplessness as well, where they just kind of go, okay, well, whatever's going to happen to me is going to happen to me. Now, we can certainly condition tap training. We could condition that if I touch you, it means X is going to happen, or I'm going to ask for X behavior, and it becomes a cue. But just to be mindful of what are we doing when we touch them with that hook. And then two, I personally use hooks a lot and have had colleagues that use it a lot to move things around in habitat, particularly if we have a shyer animal. Usually, the further I am away from that shy animal, the more comfortable they're going to be. So even though they have this object in there, if it's not particularly coming for them or touching them, usually that's a lot less pressure than if I'm sort of going into that enclosure. So it can be helpful for moving things around, maybe you introduce an enrichment item and you go, oh shoot, that is scarier to them than I realized it was going to be. I thought that was going to be totally fine. And you want to move it away. But if you go to reach for it, oh, that's going to be even scarier, right? So sometimes we get in these predicaments where we need to move something relatively quickly to take pressure or stress off the animal, or maybe just even for purely safety reasons. Maybe it's a zoo exhibit and someone's thrown something in there and you need to get it out. And we can't always crawl in with the rattlesnake and cuddle them, but I'd really like to. They're really cute. But anyway, so we can think about other ways that we can use these tools as well, not just the traditional sense. You want to take tongs?
Sure. Yeah, so another thing, we're putting distance between the caretaker and the learner. So if we have an animal who isn't particularly interested in feeding, I can't really think of a situation where I would necessarily encourage anyone to hand feed a snake. Not because snakes inherently attack, but just because I think that, I don't know, even a lot of people do it with raptors. They won't hand feed raptors. So I just don't typically think about doing that.
It's not bad if you're doing it. It's just we're not encouraging it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where I've done that with with Bruce, the Eastern Indigo, in that, like, almost without thought, I just like picked up a mouse because he, and just handed it to him. And he's very deliberate about how he takes food typically. And I really don't think he would ever grab me, but I still don't do that as a standard, right? And even if the snake is small or something like that, it's just not something I typically go towards. But again, kind of like with the snake hook or moving things around, sometimes the object is less stressful than we are. So especially if we have a snake who is shyer, having some distance between us can be really helpful. Obviously, for instance, in Veronica's case, working with or Joe's case as well, working with a venomous animal, whether we want to or not, it's probably not smart to reach in and just get super close to a venomous snake. We can increase the precision of where we put food. So, I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. We want the food exactly in this spot. We have a a feeding position or like a feeding cup or something that we always place it in, and we can put it in there. I would like to say it's worth considering using certain kinds of tongs based on your individual snake's behavior. So in Bruce's case, Bruce tends to, indigos don't wrap and coil or strike and coil. They strike and clamp, and sometimes they shake back and forth. And what happens is he will grab onto the mouse or the food item and the tongs at the same time, and he will just grip down and try and pull back. And if I'm not loose enough on those tongs quick enough, he could damage his teeth pulling off. So that's something I consider. The other option is to, so you can use rubber covered tongs. I've put vet wrap on tongs before because, and the nice thing about that is I can just redo it. So I don't have to worry, I replace it each time, so there's not like blood stuck on it. And then there's also the like bamboo tongs. They're not my favorite, just because they're kind of hard to hold and pick things up, but those would be safer for teeth. The other thing is if I do have a snake who is like a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am striker, using a tong would also make me a little concerned in that they would hit it, or they would hit it at a bad angle and might get to their eye or something like that. So that's just something to consider. I almost tried to click the slide, but I can't.
And then we're going to introduce some other ways of offering food too.
Right.
If you want a tong alternative. A weird phrase to say out loud. Okay. So feeding bins, a lot of us might have experience with this or even be using them. I know at least one of us is trying to train one. Train because the snakes are cohabitated, I should say. I shouldn't use these abbreviations in case we're all in the same language. But the purpose of it, or usually the kind of the driving force, is to establish this contextual cue, right? You only get food when you go into this specific place, right? So here, this is Mags. She's in a 15-gallon tank. She's actually not in there so much for the context cue as this was just a setup that we did, and she actually put herself in there and put herself out. But right, so the purpose of it is to have this set space where food happens. I know within the Rett group, there's someone who has actually conditioned her to think that she gets fed on the lower level, always on the lower level, and she approaches from the top. So we can have different types of context cues, right? But this one has been really popular over time. And a lot of times it's kind of thrown out as a solution. Oh, if your snake is striking, you need to feed them in a separate container. So this kind of thing has been passed down. But it's a conditioning process just like anything else, right? And when we know how it works, we can apply it to other scenarios just as easily. But it is a tool that could be used. Maybe some of us want to shift for whatever reason, like I think it's Genevieve who's doing shifting because she has two snakes living together. So it becomes a way to separate them for training and for feeding, which works out great. So there may be an application for a feeding bin.
And Lori does it so she can clean enclosures as well, which I think is really smart.
Yeah. Oh, did we actually?
You did.
I don't know if I actually played the video.
You did.
Yeah. See.
So cup on a stick.
Cup on a stick.
Cup on a stick. God, all these phrases we're coming up with. It's ridiculous. Okay. So I initially started doing this. Carrie and I decided that it might be a different option to do with Latoa, my pine snake, and you'll actually see video of her of training before I introduced a cup. And one of the things, and we'll talk about this a little later, that I didn't really want, I don't super love having in a snake that I'm training is a really strong strike response or a strike and wrap, especially if I'm trying to feed multiple or do multiple repetitions in succession somewhat quickly. If I have a snake who strikes and wraps, it's more likely to take more time for them to eat it. And some of you may have experienced the difference between a snake eating off tongs versus eating out of a puzzle, you'll see the snake oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes they'll just kind of bite it and then swallow it. That's more a behavior that I like to see when I'm target training or doing any kind of training with snakes, actually. And this worked very, very well for Latoa, in that I almost completely, from the get-go, almost completely extinguished her striking behavior after when offering food. She almost, not 100% of the time, but almost never strikes in the cup. And I had to start with the food closer to the edge and then back. And you don't even have to have it all the way at the back. So I used this with her and it was really, really successful. However, when I use this with Bruce, and maybe I just haven't conditioned it well enough, Bruce almost every time strikes it. So I stopped using it. The way I did it is, you can see I just had, this is like a salsa container, and I like that it's clear because I can actually see when she's taken it, so I can remove the cup once she's taken it. You don't have to. But it's got, I found this in the garage. It's like a big screw bolt thing. So I put a nut, a washer, or the cup, a washer, and then a nut again. What I have considered doing is actually putting some yoga mat at the back, so in case they did strike, they wouldn't hurt themselves on the screw or the nut. But that's one option. It engages a seeking system, so they're doing that whole puzzle situation. And it provides the benefits of puzzles and tongs, in that they're actually looking for it, and as opposed to a tong where we just bam. And that's another option to increase the foraging time. Yeah, there's other options. You can use tubes, pipes, boxes. I'm sure there's, I've used a spoon before. The only thing with a spoon is if they strike, you're likely to like pop the mouse off because it strikes fast and you go like this, and then the mouse goes flying, and then they're like, where is it? And you have to go find it, and all that's just not super helpful. And then it's covered in substrate and wool. So that's one option, I suppose. Stephanie, you might be fine with it just for your little creature. Yeah.
We have a question. Either of us can take this. I'll let you decide. Can you get movement of the food when it is in the cup, like wiggling mice on tongs?
Yeah, you just turn it like this. Sometimes it's not enough, especially if a snake is used to having it wiggled. But I have done that with Mundy, my carpet python, because he seems to be really focused on movement. Lori and I were talking about that earlier in the week. He's really focused on movement. And that's one thing that I've been really thinking a lot about, is how do I change that approximation, or do I need to? Maybe it's okay. But yeah, I have taken it before and just wiggled it a little bit, so rolled the cup, and then it wiggles just enough for them to be like, oh, look, and then smell it, and then go food. So that's an option. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Cool. Awesome.
And then this is, I guess, a term I think that we maybe use more in zookeeping world land, as far as a baffle. This is something visual that blocks. So don't let the word distract you. It's just a visual barrier. So maybe some of us are already doing this. I think a lot of us probably have already done this, and we just didn't put a word or a strategy or a reason to it, maybe. But it's just kind of blocking off things that might be distracting or scary, or both. You can also use it to create a safer space. So if your workspace that you have to interact with is this big, and you want it to be this big, you can just cover a part of that with a piece of cardboard, or maybe even sometimes a draped towel. It's not that you need to physically contain that learner, it's just a visual barrier so that they're more focused to where you want to work. So it can be neutral, it can also be not neutral. So you want to take into account the body language that you're seeing and the behavior that you're seeing to know if it's neutral. It can also be a cue. Hey, training's going to happen now. So be mindful of how it might be functioning for your learner. You can use it to create safety. You can use it to help shape approximations. So again, like, I have a list of habitat. and I have no option but to open the entire back in order to work with this animal. But hey, that's a really big approximation for them. That's a lot of open space. Or hey, they might get really excited and just jump out. And so you might want to cover part of it. Or if you have a really shy animal and you are working in a tank, I think we're actually going to talk about specific challenges as we go in, so maybe I'm getting ahead. But you might want to put paper up or something to just change visually how your space looks to train. And then I think we kind of started to talk about the feeding crate functioning in the same way, but you can use a shift box or a crate. This is a still from a video, so sorry, it's a little bit blurry. But this, you can see Mag's just kind of cruising out of there to go explore. This was her, this might have been the second crate that she learned. To crate in is just a regular soft-sided small animal crate. We can also use, probably a lot of us are using like totes. A lot of dog and cat crates probably won't be suitable because of the mesh, even if we modify them. But you can use lots of different things for crates, and we can start to train those voluntary movements. We can train them to go in and out on their own. So when they have more choice to control, this is going to lower their stress, like we've talked about in previous weeks. We can condition a more positive CER. What the heck is a CER? Conditioned emotional response. Conditioned emotional response. So if I walk down an alley and I get mugged, now I have a conditioned emotional response to that alley that I do not want to go that way. If I then put on my brave hat and I walk down that alley and I find a $100 bill, now I feel a little bit better about that alley or that street. So maybe I might try and walk down there again. If the next time I walk down there, I find another $100 bill, well, that's pretty cool.
I'm going to turn left every time I see.
I'm going to start maybe going out of my way to go down that alley. So it's changing, okay, this was really negative or even just a little bit negative, and now it's positive. So we can have neutral stimuli, we can have positive stimuli, we can have negative stimuli, right? So how we feel about something. And we want our learners hopefully to feel positive when we're introducing a crate. So we are basically introducing to them, this is your safe place. Wherever we go, this is yours. This is always going to be safe. This is always going to mean good things. So if I take you outside, if you're not ready to go outside, you might look from your safe place. And I saw some of us already doing this in the homework, taking a box from the habitat, right? We've got our learner in the box, and we take the box to the enrichment area. We leave the box. They can choose to come in or out of the box, and then we can take the box back, right? So it just becomes a way to shift them where they have a little bit more choice of whether they want to interact there or not. And then,
can I add real quick?
Yeah.
Along lines of CER is so conditioned emotional response. Welcome to the world of animal training and endless acronyms.
Yeah.
They never go away. You just have to learn them. So if you're looking at a CER, think Pavlov. So think classical conditioning. So a conditional emotional response in the alleyway, when we're talking about, oh, we found $200 bills, we're much more likely to go down it. That would actually be a contingency. So that would be a reinforcement of the behavior. So CER is focused on the next time you see that alleyway, you go involuntarily. You just get excited. You're like, oh, that's right, $100 bills, right? So that's where we're going for CER. Yeah, so when you have that, a crate as a CER, now coming out of the enclosure, they see the door open and they're like, just like when you saw that alley, because they're like, yeah, I get to come outside now.
And then it can be a foundation for other behaviors, right? If we're able to more easily move them to a new space. If we're starting with a stressed animal in a new space, it takes a lot longer to, now we have to condition that space before we can move forward, right? Also, if we're getting movement right? Habitat to shift, habitat to shift to habitat, then we already have a behavior we can shape, right? So that's pretty cool. Oh, okay. So let's talk a little bit about different types of habitats. I think we actually might have most of these represented with the learners that we have. So when we're coming from the top of the habitat, one way that you can maximize flight distance, maximize that animal's ability to, even if they don't retreat from you, feel like they have the ability to retreat from you, right? So we're not looking necessarily for them to run away from you, but just that they have the space if they wanted to get away from you is what's going to help them feel safer. So if you're approaching from the longest side or even a corner of the longest side, they have the most space to move away if they wanted to. And then if the sides are transparent, covering them with a visual barrier or baffle is going to help you to reduce pressure as well, right? So that they have space that they feel like they can move away to be safe. We can use tools to increase the distance that we are from them as well, because if we're coming from the top, a lot of times that's going to be a little bit more predatory. So they might have a stronger reaction than coming from the front. And then, sorry, I'm going a little bit fast because I'm realizing the time. We're probably going to go a little more over than usual.
We also started a little late.
Okay. Okay, let's keep going. You want to take this one?
Sure.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Let me just. Okay. Yeah. So, when you're considering which side to, when it's a sliding door and you've got two sides, I will typically go to the side that is furthest away from the snake. Just so that gives him the option to either move towards or move away. Sometimes, not always, especially if they're at the back of the enclosure and I feel like that's enough space for them based on that snake's behavior for them to just come forward if that's enough space. One thing you'll see in a lot of my videos and actual Carrie's videos as well is we'll put tables or we'll work on the floor if that's where the enclosure is. I know this might be kind of hard for Dylan because his enclosure is 5 feet up, but we will put a table there and that creates even more distance for us, from us. And especially when we're working on just building a relationship with them, then we can create more space. And also now they have a safe space, they build a CER onto the table. Which is good because we see the table.
Okay.
Sorry?
In the homework, a lot of, or several of us are working with tables already. So.
Yes, that's true, which is great. The other option is that one of the other nice things about having a table real quick is that in the event that you have a snake that, like we mentioned, decides to jump out, they don't jump out and fall on the ground. Now they have a nice little cushion table. So there's that. Standing to one side or the other can also reduce the pressure because if there's a door here and then opening here and I come over here, that actually provides even more space for them to come towards us, because they're typically in, even if we have huge enclosures, we're usually peering in at them. And so creating some space can be really helpful for that. Covering some of the glass, that same baffle barrier thing. And yeah.
And I think what I hear a lot of times and what I've felt, especially starting out, the fear, I think the handler or the trainer can bring some fear with having those sliding doors as well, that the snake is going to jump out. So these strategies hopefully will help you feel a little bit more confident too. Mm-hmm. And again, having that table can be a nice.
And just be careful closing the door. Make sure that they're not going to come out as you're closing it.
And then if we have doors that lift up or swing to the side, one thing that I noticed a lot of times, even if it's a fiberglass or plastic enclosure, those doors tend to be heavy for whatever reason, or heavy-ish. So one thing I like to be mindful of is it's really tempting to use your own body to support it. Like, okay, so I'm going in here, I'll just set that door on my shoulder and I'll work. But if you can find another way to secure that door more securely, it's going to be safer for you and the learner and give you more range of motion to be able to work. So if it's putting some sort of a block or maybe just rolling up a towel to block it open, but having something else to support the door than your own body, or hold the door open than your own body, can be helpful. Hopefully it's not at this stage where we're now starting to train. Hopefully we've done the foundation work and we're not so much worried about, oh, I'm going to have to close this really quick because this learner might get upset or come towards me. Hopefully we've laid the foundation where that's not the case, that you're going to need to close it really quick. If you do think that might be a case, maybe having some visual baffles close at hand to be able to manipulate the environment if you needed to might be a good idea. And then I think we actually covered a lot of this.
Yeah. Let's move on.
Let's go. Okay, so let's talk about actually conditioning the target. We are going to focus on 2 strategies. There might be more, but we're going to focus on 2 and kind of some variations. But so we can provide the object as a prompt, as a cue, as a motivator, right? I've introduced the stimuli, get the behavior, and then reinforce the behavior. So this would be more, we haven't shown them any food to prompt this behavior, right? So this is a shaping with the behavior kind of in the forefront. And then another way that we can do it is we can present the object and the food as a pairing, get the behavior, and then introduce the reinforcer. So this would be more baiting or luring. So if we're working with an animal that's really shy or hasn't had much exposure to novel objects, baiting or luring sometimes is a really good strategy. It's really nice for baby snakes. So maybe we can take the target, just feed them off the target for a little while. And we're going to show some different examples today of ways to. Wait.
I should have uploaded a video of me doing that with Monday. Oh, well.
We had one last week. I think we can throw it in the group.
Okay.
So we can change. So if the object, maybe the object itself is scary. So if we introduce the object, maybe they just leave, right? Even if it's really far away. Maybe it becomes that we can't even have a usable working distance. So in that case, baiting or luring might be better. Like my brain just lost itself. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so baiting and luring is typically, when it comes to training, not something that we want to rely on for a super long time, because what will happen is the best example, I haven't had an issue with it training snakes yet, but an example I have is if my macaw is, in a tree and I show him a nut to lure him there, he can sit there and be like, well, that is a pecan. I really want a pine nut right now. And then stay in the tree.
And we don't know that he wants a pine nut.
Huh?
We don't know that he wants a pine nut.
Oh, we always know that he wants a pine nut. He has a very clear preference. So we kind of want to keep it a surprise. Now, granted, with a snake, like they probably know what they're getting. They're going to smell it, all that kind of thing. But still, luring it and baiting it, if we do that for too long, they might not give us any behavior unless they see it first. So that's usually something we want to fade out. But especially when we're working on this kind of thing, we're working on building a conditional CER, conditioned emotional response. Luring, showing them the food is actually really quite necessary. So that's just something to consider. But we're not at that stage yet. I'm not concerned about fading a bribe or a lure.
And we might not change the prey, but we might change the reinforcer. So I have worked with some, this is a little bit of a bunny trail, but I have worked with some reptiles. Trying to think if I have a specific snake example, but I've definitely worked with some reptiles where you're able to keep and maintain the behavior through a dormant period where they wouldn't normally eat a lot, just because there's been enough contingency established beforehand. So particularly with like shifting monitors, and I've seen it done with alligators and crocodiles as well, which really go off food for a large part of the year. That behavior seems to maintain using other reinforcers than food. So that would be another kind of benefit of shifting to not presenting the food before the behavior as you go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Bueno.
Okay, so targets. I am the master of being indecisive about what kind of target I want to use. So here are a few. The buoy is that in the bottom picture, the one on the right, the half white, half blue one. That's a buoy. I got it at a Clicker Expo, so I'm pretty sure you can buy them off Kayak Empire. We can add a link if you want. But I started out with a couple ones, different ones. You'll see in, I think it's even the next video, there's a straw with a big wood ball on top of it. Actually, I started out with this one, the one on the top right. It's this little Kong. It's actually pretty small. I could have used a larger one, and I probably should have, because and it's like a plastic chopstick that I just kind of squeezed through it. But the reason I stopped using this one is I realized that Latoa could actually probably swallow it, especially if it came off of the chopstick. Things I don't want to happen. That's called surgery. So I stopped using that one. I still use it for my bearded dragon because I'm not as concerned about him swallowing it. And then I switched to the buoy for her because she definitely can't swallow that. And I use that for both of our other snakes. And then this is what we would call a flat target. I know that Lori.
Where are you pointing here?
Yeah, right there. Lori, and the one below is the same one. I know Lori uses plates with sticks, and I think they're usually taped. Yeah, and that seems to be pretty successful for her. For this one, I took a peanut butter lid and drilled 2 holes through it, and then took a sturdy straw and put that through it. And then you'll notice actually I have tape over it. Now there has been some concern. I haven't had any issues, but there has been some concern around tape in reptiles. In this instance, this is never in with my snake without me there. It's just a target. The other thing I like about it is I can take the tape off, and then I don't have to worry about blood or anything and washing it off, which is great. So that's one option. I use that with my because I really want a small one that's like maybe 2.5 inches in diameter, and I use that because I wanted to be able to fit it in between branches and furniture and objects in my coastal carpets enclosure. And the other nice thing is it's nice and flat, so it's really easy to rest food on top of it if I'm trying to pair that way. Color and shape can also become discriminative. I used blue because I read somewhere, and I was gonna look this up before I taught the class, or we taught the class, and I totally forgot, but I read somewhere that blue is actually a pretty visible color for snakes. Carrie, am I right?
I've read conflicting things. I've read some snakes can see a lot of colors.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has to do with how diurnal they are.
Yeah.
If they're more active at night, that changes their vision somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the aspect that they can see UV, so that might change some colors for them as well.
So anyway, as you can tell, I have a favorite color, and I also thought that this color was good for the snakes, so I used blue. So a static or a station is just like it would usually with birds, cats, dogs. It's like a little, it's kind of like like that flat target, but it's like this little thing, and they're trained to get onto it and hold there and stay there. And so that's technically a target because they're orienting their body towards an object. That's usually how I train getting onto a scale too. I'll train them to either just station onto the scale immediately, or I'll sometimes take like a cut out a hole of a yoga mat that fits on top of the scale, train them to station on that, and then put that yoga mat on the scale. And then they move towards the yoga mat because they've already been conditioned for it. Okay, let's go to the next one.
If I know we have some dog trainers in the class too, so maybe you've made your targets out of like tennis balls, different kinds of balls. Ping pong balls can be okay for smaller snakes, but if you're getting into anything that can swallow it, I don't recommend ping pong balls unless you're gonna really kind of secure it to that stick, which I know, Peter, you talked about a little bit. Tennis balls I don't recommend at all because they can get their teeth stuck in those little hairs. So in wiffle balls for the same reason. So anything that they can get teeth stuck in, you don't want. So you can see a theme here where all these are sort of hard materials. Rubber should be okay because they won't get stuck in it.
And smooth because they're easier to clean. Good luck cleaning a tennis ball.
Yeah.
So here is Latoa. This is my pine snake I was talking about earlier. Here you see on the right, there is that straw with the wooden ball on the end of it. This I went to before I went to the buoy because I wanted something bigger she couldn't swallow. She can't swallow that. But here is actually a session where she, oh no, it's kind of glitchy. So you'll notice, we'll have to play it again, but she literally does. Huh?
Is it glitchy?
Yeah, it's glitchy. Sorry, you guys. It's like super glitchy. So this is actually a session, as you'll see, the next videos are from the same session, where she actually knew how to target pretty well and she would move around for the target pretty well. But in this case, she was just kind of being slow about coming out. So you'll notice, see that tiny head movement and then the food comes in. So it was a really small approximation that I asked for, and this is what I would be looking for in the snakes that you have that have not been target trained already. So I looked for a tiny little movement, and that food came in. Now, I moved pretty quickly. That might not be something that you really want to do, depending on your snake. You'll also notice that I was using tongs. So this is before I switched to using the cup. And I didn't get a strike out of that one, but she was also moving really slowly. So I wasn't sure about it. Okay, go ahead to the next one. So this was the approximation directly after it. I knew she was kind of in the mood now, so I held it out. Gosh, why is the video not working now?
And it must be a network issue because it's playing here. So hopefully in the recording it'll be smooth.
Okay. So you'll notice here I asked for obviously a larger approximation. My criteria here is a tongue flick. So there is the tongue flick, and then comes the food. And you'll notice, see how she goes into an S shape in her neck a little bit? Oh, and actually right here, she stays focused on the target, and so I move the food in front of it, which is something that can happen. I'm trying to think. And then she grabs pretty nicely there again. So yeah, let's watch that one more time if we can. And you'll see I move the target a little bit, which is something I'm trying to move away from, but I'm also just kind of generally a wiggly person. So there's that. Rosalie, I have not been using an intentional bridge. One thing I think is operating as a bridge is actually the movement of the food or the cup coming in. I also tend to remove, not in this video I don't think, but I tend to remove the target stick as I'm bringing the food in, which I also think is serving as the bridge that tells them, yes, you did the behavior. I am curious, I really want to start using a bridge because I want to start free shaping eventually. And I was thinking about using a flashlight, just with like a light that I can flash as the bridge. So snakes can hear, but they have atympanic ears, so the ears are on the inside. So they don't hear as well, or at least they hear differently. So I'm interested to use a clicker and see how that kind of goes, or a whistle or something like that. But I just haven't done that yet.
Huh? No.
Okay.
Lower frequency.
Yeah, lower frequencies work better. So, okay, next. So this, obviously, this is the same session, but I knew she was in the mood and I could target her up. Now what you'll notice is she gets distracted for a second and I opt to move the target. So she's moving towards, oh, what's that? Huh, something over there. I move it and then she goes straight for it. Now here you'll see also, I love that repetition. And watch what she does. S shape, bam, she wraps it. So that was one of the things I got. Can we play it again? When
we both cheered multiple times.
Huh?
I think we both cheered multiple times for that repetition.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So this was one of the times where I would get that strike that made me transition to using the cup versus here.
Can you operationally define in the mood?
Yes. So basically, I knew you were going to ask that. So I would operationalize in the mood as she was actively following the target, actively looking at me, waiting for the next approximation or the next opportunity for reinforcement. Oh, Genevieve, thank you so much for asking me to operationalize. I thought it was Carrie asking me.
Hey.
So this is the video of, you can see I'm using the cup now, and she's actually coming out of that tube. So she actually just, usually now when I open the enclosure, she just starts looking. And so this one I actually found interest. I got this shared to Susan Friedman's page, which was a really exciting moment for me. And then I'll talk, can we play that again so I can, So she's coming out here. She tongue flicks really, really nicely and evenly. She's moving cleanly.
What happened?
It's just glitching. I'm so sorry, you guys. Okay, so tongue flick, and I often will have to like kind of move my head to see. So then she very smoothly moves in, and I accidentally wiggled it. I didn't need to, but it's like a circle, so it wiggles. This one is also nice, and you'll see how she started in an S position, but she moved really slowly. And then I present that, and she lifts up because she sees the food coming. And here she's gonna reach up. And then watch what she does with her head. See how she reaches up and goes down? What that tells me is that she really knows what's happening. And I'm sorry, I'm getting like a little, that video always makes me a little excited. Like I'm like excited because she actually is looking. She knows that the reinforcer is coming. She knows that's where the reinforcer happened. So it's my favorite repetition of her I've ever had in my entire life. And I love it. So.
Genevieve, in the mood, yes, hungry, but also interested to interact in the training session. So we have bad days, our animals have bad days. Maybe we've set the criteria and the environment exactly the same as we have before, but it's still not working. So it's just identifying if they're ready to engage with the session or they're not. And if they're not, actually we're going to come back to troubleshooting, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, it's just a way kind of gauging, are they into this? Are they ready? Yeah.
Lori, yeah, I totally will find that they lose interest. As you saw in one of those videos where they kind of, she got, I don't even know if I would consider it losing interest. Like I think they're still, they still want to achieve reinforcement, but they might get distracted, like a different smell, or maybe I just, when I moved the mouse towards them, some of the little mousy smell got into the air and then they took a whiff of it and moved off. And yeah, so you will see me move the target sometimes. For me, in a perfect world of really clean training, I wouldn't at all. That hasn't something I've gotten to yet. What I will do, I have found, is sometimes if I just wait before I move the target, they will actually reorient to it. And that's one of the ways I know I hypothesize that they really have that connection to the target is what ends up being the reinforcer, is because then they're like, wait, this is me totally anthropomorphizing, but they're kind of like, wait, I got distracted. Where is the reinforcement? Oh, I go to that, I get reinforced. So that's one of my thoughts. But yeah, I try not to move it, but I do. So yeah.
And I found too that some snakes will have their own sort of MO for how they approach the target. So some snakes might, and it might, even, having worked with, multiple snakes over different environments, I don't know if those differences are just stereotypies or things that they've assigned value to. Oh, this is part of the behavior, or if that's just how they approach it for whatever reason. So I think watch for that too, because some snakes will always kind of go to the side and come back, or they might pause and then go forward. So I think that's a really good point that Peter brings up about just sometimes just waiting. I think that's the hardest thing, is to have that patience. Sometimes it seems like a really long time when it's really not.
I'm actually really excited. Just side note, Sarabi, my rainbow boa, doesn't usually come out if I'm sitting here. Usually she'll be out at night, and she actually is out right now.
And we say usually, but how long have you had Sarabi?
3 weeks.
Yes, it's really short time. That's really cool.
I know, but that's typical. Yeah, so I'm really excited about this actually. Okay, cool. Side note. Changed.
Yeah. This is kind of a makeshift target stick, right? So, and I've actually seen a couple other handlers using this, but this is a fly swatter, but you could also use like a fish net. But this is Olaf, a corn snake, and he was actually introduced to target training more so because he was having some physical issues of regurgitating. So adding some different enrichment and training, in addition to slightly changing how and how often he got his food, seemed to have stopped the regurgitation issue. So, as well as he had some anorexia as well as some regurgitating. So a couple concurrent issues. So in this case, he's getting this. We were just trying to get just, those 2 or 3 repetitions at this point. We're just introducing the target. So you see he's getting a whole pinky. Those could certainly have been cut up, but in this case, this was his first introduction to targeting, and really to non-natural objects as well. All right, I'm seeing this chat thing blinking.
I'm working on it.
Okay. Spatula. Yeah, spatula could work great. I think that's a great idea. All right, thanks, Veronica. Sorry we went a little over. I'll have the replay up soon. Yeah, okay, cool. Baby snake, baby snake.
So this was a week or so ago. This is the first time I ever introduced Mundi. No, it was a few days ago. This is the first time I ever introduced Mundi to Reptilinks. He had seen this before, and you'll notice me moving it. Partially, I moved it because I was trying to increase criteria. You'll notice he actually breaks it in half, but then he was eating half pieces, so it was fine. So normally I would not increase criteria this fast. However, he was showing me that I had a feeling he was going to keep going, so I just decided to go ahead and push it a little bit. I try not to change criteria in the middle of asking for something, but in this case I did, because we all break our own rules, right? Okay, it doesn't really matter. It's just him eating, so we all know what that looks like. So this was the next repetition. And I might actually have it angled towards him more, but because I was trying to get his behavior on video for all of you, I decided to go ahead and have it flat so you could actually see his tongue flick, because that's my criteria is tongue flick. And you'll notice that whenever I'm watching a video, oh, hi, Sarabi. Whenever I'm watching a video, I tend to bridge in the video. I just can't help it. Just with my hand whenever I'm watching something. My baby girl.
He's so cute.
He's actually a year old now. Almost a year and a half.
Wait, what's
Okay,
happening?
so in these ones, you
Oh
see
my God. Stop.
look how much I'm wiggling it. So you'll actually, can we start that over?
Yeah, sorry, that's technical malfunction.
So look how much I'm wiggling because he was moving around and I was impatient, and so then he actually strikes at the target and I decide to go ahead and reinforce. So pause, don't play the other one yet. So I decided to go ahead and reinforce because he still touched the target. However, typically I wouldn't reinforce it. In the next video, go ahead and play it. You'll see that he strikes it, but I don't move it. And I wait, because what I found is sometimes when they strike it, they will actually then go ahead and re-investigate it. So I'll still get my criteria. So he, doesn't he? Did he strike it?
He came with a tongue flick after.
Yeah, so he strikes it and then he tongue flicks. So in which case I decided again to go ahead and reinforce, which I probably should have done the first time, but since it was so early on in his training, I decided to go ahead and just reinforce anyway. So that's one thing that you might consider if you have a snake who decides to go ahead and strike. You might just want to wait for a second and see if they go ahead and re-tongue flick it. So that's an option. Further on in training, I have removed the target after they strike as technically a negative punishment consequence. Typically, I try to avoid this because I'm a really big fan of errorless learning, but I'm not completely opposed to it. So it's something that you can do. I don't want any of you guys to do this yet, especially if you're doing your first target training sessions. I really want you to see, I really want you guys to make it as positive. But I have done that with Bruce, for instance, because occasionally Bruce will strike the target, but then he'll go ahead and reinvestigate it. But if he strikes it really hard or really quickly, I will sometimes remove it. But that's not my MO.
Yeah, so we're getting the question, have you ever seen a pattern develop of strike and then target by waiting?
I have not. I think part of it is possibly because I get better at not moving the target. I think when you move the target, that tends to elicit a strike. Not always, but it can. So that's one thing to consider. It's not something I have ever seen happen or even quite frankly considered. So I really appreciate that question, actually. Yeah, so.
I haven't had it happen either. I will say if I do get, and we're gonna, well, we'll just talk about it now. I was gonna say we're gonna get into this with troubleshooting, but if I get a snake that has struck the target more than once, right? So I've done a session and they've struck. I've done another session and they've struck. Usually I look at different things within my environment and with what I'm introducing to that environment that I can use to change that. So that might be changing how the food is introduced or where it's introduced or when it's introduced. It might be looking at, is that snake just really hungry? Should I maybe feed out a little bit before I start a session and then do a session.
That's something I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
That's something I've done with Latoa actually. Is I will give her a whole mouse first. Oftentimes in a puzzle feeder, so I can give her the puzzle, leave, come back, and then she's actually looking for me and looking for a target. But sometimes, especially if it's been a longer time since she's eaten than normal or something like that, then I will just go ahead and do that because I'll get less striking behavior. I've done that with birds too, where birds were just too focused on the food. And so I give them a bowl of food and then I come back later and try again. So that's something to consider as well. Yeah.
Sometimes what's instigating that strike, well, as far as we can tell, I can't say for certain, but what it seems to be, one of the things that will elicit it is if you're pulling away the target, right? And the target is a cue. The cue that I have the ability to earn a reinforcer, and you're taking it away before the connection has been made that when the target goes away, the food comes, right? So we might have to make our criteria smaller so that we can give food faster. So they get more reinforcers in a shorter period of time, and they start to realize that there's a contingency, right? Target appears, I do behavior, target goes away, I get food. Because if they haven't built that contingency, they've just maybe paired target food, right? So you have sort of a conditioned response to the target where it means food, but they don't maybe realize yet the behavior key point or any key point in the contingency. So you're just simply taking away the ability to earn food, and that can be aversive and cause a strike as well. So we can look at there's multiple different reasons why they might be striking the target. We can approach it in different ways. But as far as developing a pattern of behavior or a chained behavior, I have not had that happen.
Kitty.
Okay. Oh, no. Sorry, I'm getting some lag and changing slides. So, okay. So I feel like we're going way over. That's okay. It's recorded.
We are.
Just wondering if we want to hold. Do we want to hold this for next week? Yeah. Let's, because I don't think it's important to the homework per se. So we're gonna hold training plans for next week so we can spend some more time. Let's briefly go to troubleshooting. We've talked a little bit about some of this stuff already. So when we look at things going wrong, right, or getting a behavior that we don't want, we're going to take ownership of that, right? I've set up the criteria in such a way that this is the response that makes sense to my learner. So we're going to, I'm sorry, it's getting really dark. I forgot to turn on the light. So by computer light here. So we're going to change the environment. So let's look at some things. We've talked about striking the target a little bit. We might find also that the learner so when I think we touched on this within the mood, right? So the learner might just leave. I'm out of here. They go to their hide, or maybe they never come out of their hide. So how are we going to address that? Well, there's different ways to address that, but one thing probably is to stop the session how it's going right then, right? So we probably want to stop, remove ourselves, reassess how we're going to move forward. Maybe that's a good point, a time to introduce a puzzle feeder or some other activity, or ask. This would also be a time where if you had behaviors that were established, like a shift to crate or interacting with a puzzle, you could offer that so they have something else to do entirely. But we want to take that as information that they're giving us that probably our criteria is too high. They might just be having a bad day, so it's okay to try it again another day. But usually if we are getting that information, we want to start with a lower criteria the next time. And sometimes it can be hard to recover those sessions right away. So if you introduce a really high criteria and they're having a hard time, and they're giving you these avoidance behaviors, some snakes are really resilient and they'll come right back out of it and they're ready to go. And some snakes, they're going to need some time to decompress. before you can, I'm anthropomorphizing by using that word, would be the scientific, maybe for their stress levels to come down, we'll say. And so they might, you might have to abandon that session and come back another time.
And I know that can be really hard, especially for me, because I want to get a lot of behavior really fast, and my snake might only eat once or twice a month or something like that. So I get that it can be really frustrating, but at the same time, it's also really important and valuable to know when to end a session. I ended a session with Latoa one of the last times I trained, actually because it was going really well. So she did like 4 really great repetitions, and I was like, cool, let's end on that. Here's your puzzle. Now, to be fair, I have 5 snakes that I get to work with, so it didn't hurt me too bad. But it was just kind of like, I wanted to end on a good note. This was really, really positive. Let's just give her back. And one thing I will say that I noticed with her is when I had to put her on a diet and work on her movement and stuff like that, because she got, I think in our first class we talked about how I had to like pick her up and hold her in a really stressful way because she was rapidly gaining weight, and I was worried it was because of a tumor or something like that. When I put her on a diet, I realized when I started training again, I had to relax criteria quite a lot, just because I wasn't getting the same behavior I had. Now, I don't think that was in her not remembering it, because we know that they can remember things pretty well. We've had the studies have been done on that, but it was almost kind of, now she needed to be reconditioned to the target, just because she might have gotten a little stressed by it or something like that. Cool.
It'll be really cool to see more research and studies on snake neurology and brain function. One thing that I saw a lot with one thing that I saw a lot with the puzzle feeding trials I was doing and timing them is if they got the same puzzle multiple times in a row, their time would always get faster. If they then got different puzzles and then were reintroduced to an old puzzle, they would go back to their old time. So I don't know, and then it would get faster, and I didn't continue. I should have continued it out to see if then they get faster at a faster rate than before, or how long it takes to get back to their previous time. But it's what is immediately important seems to be part of the learning puzzle for snakes that I've seen just anecdotally. So if the criteria changes and what they how they sort of navigate their environment changes, different things maybe become important. I don't know. I'd really hope that we can learn more about that in the coming years. Let's see. Okay, so I think yeah.
I'm taking care of the message.
Oh, thanks, Steph. We'll have the recording up soon. Thank you. Sorry, we did time this out to be a lot shorter. We just went it's a really exciting topic. So sorry. So sorry for that. But let's just touch quickly on if they shy away from either the food or the target, because I think that is important, especially for this week's homework, depending on where you're going to start in the process. So usually if you are presenting food or target and you're getting either a jump back or a complete retreat, then you're sorry, he's like right next to me when you worked. Hey, Porter. You are probably too close. So you might be able to reset by doing some of the things we talked about with how we approach the habitat. So moving to your actual body language to the side, or why are you laughing?
Dog barking. That's fine. Go ahead.
One bark. Scared me though. So we might be able to take some pressure off by physically moving ourselves, but usually it's our tool that is too close. So it can be for me starting out, and even sometimes with new In new situations, I have this impulse of, oh, I think they're going to be fine, and they're not fine. So if you do get an instance of where they are pulling away, you remove that pressure as quickly as possible and kind of reset. Whatever distance you think is going to be okay, I would start a little bit back and resist the urge to move closer. Let them wait and see if they're going to approach you. Give them time to act, because a lot of times we hold that food, right? We've gotten the target, we hold the food, and particularly with target training with snakes, for whatever reason, over other species, in those first repetitions, it sometimes I find it takes them a little longer to come and get the food. So we've given the target, we've presented the food, and oh my gosh, they're not taking it. They're not taking it. They're not taking it. And it feels like an eternity, but it's really not. So give them time to come and get it before you move it towards them, because moving it towards them, especially if they're really focused on it, can be startling or can provide too much pressure and can be aversive. And the last thing we want to do in creating, introducing this brand new training to them is introduce any sort of aversive. So when in doubt, give space. You want to add to that? Is that good? Okay. Let's go.
Let's show that one next week.
Yeah, I'm going to save that. Okay, so for homework this week, what we're going to be looking at is all of these should be easy enough for beginner snakes, and if you need ways to adapt it to them, let us know. If your snake's not eating this week, that's okay. You could theoretically still introduce your target with some other reinforcer just as a conditioned pairing. So I'm going to introduce this thing and see if you can see what kind of response you get to it. If they are eating, there's a few different ways you can go about this. So for our baby snakes, our beginner snakes, snakes without a lot of learning history, snakes that are shy of things
Without a lot of
learning history. Sorry, am I starting to slur?
No, I'm saying that they all have learning history. So a lot of
learning history with novel
stimuli.
Yeah. So we can take the bribe bait route, right? So we can condition the apparatus itself, whatever we're going to feed with. So don't even worry about introducing the target at this point. You can just introduce what you're going to feed on. So you're going to use tongs. Are you going to use a cup? Are you going to feed on a plate and drop the food on it? However you're going to deliver your food, we can just practice delivering the food this week. So, and sometimes it's helpful even to practice mechanics without the snake. So just maybe practice picking up gumdrops and putting them where you want them to go. With whatever device you're going to use. Or it doesn't have to be gumdrops. Don't go out and buy gumdrops. That's just an example. And so we can practice feeding, but let's try to practice feeding multiple items. So either multiple smaller items or pieces. I feel like we talked a lot about prey last week, but if you need help with that, let us know. But this is just feeding. So however you're going to present food, you're practicing presenting the food and having them take it. The second,
Stephanie, I have some ideas about the worm, so just I'll get back to you about that.
For the garter?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then if we're not going to go that route, then we can look at conditioning the target. So if you don't want to practice just the food delivery, we can condition just the target. So feed on or near the target. So that looks like that video with, was it Latoa that we had this week with no, it was Monday. Put the food right in front of the target. So here's the target, here's the food.
That was Latoa.
They're eating right next to the target, right? So you're not worrying about taking it away. You're not looking for any behavior per se. You're just feeding next to the target. This can also
on the target,
look like
the target.
laying the target flat. So if you're using a spatula, laying it flat in the enclosure, putting your food on it, and just letting them eat off the target. Lids work really well for that. That if you're using a flat target. If you're using a rounder target, that's going to increase some difficulty by, even if you're just setting the food on it, because it's still a novel object that they have to get used to. So you're going to have to take into account how they react to novel objects. Hopefully the last 3 weeks have given you enough history to know.
And if they're into puzzles, just pick something that kind of looked like one of the puzzles they were really interested in, maybe. If they were into a cardboard box, maybe get a piece of cardboard. Or something along those lines.
And if this is, so if we're doing target, you can try to get just that 1 or 2 repetitions, like with Olaf, the corn snake, and the fly swatter. You don't have to worry about, you know, getting 10 repetitions, just get 1 or 2 so that you're getting that positive association with the target. And then the second way, so if you're not pairing, right, so this way we have food, target, behavior, they're eating, right? So that's our contingency. Food and target are both a cue or motivator of the behavior. For the second way, you're just presenting the target. So for really curious snakes, Lori, I'm thinking of your carpet pythons, right? That they're already investigating lots of things. If you're just introducing the target, they might be interested in it just because it's new. You're introducing it to the environment. Hey, what is that? As soon as you get even just a look, they don't even have to approach it. Go ahead and reinforce that behavior with your food reinforcer.
Like that first rep with Latoa.
Yes. So at this stage, you're just looking for that look. And again, you're just looking for a few repetitions. Don't try to get a dozen repetitions, because the thing is, we want to establish that foundation before we add the criteria and move forward. Okay, I'm really sorry we went so long, guys, but we will take questions. Peter, if you need to go, it's okay.
No, it's fine.
You need to do. But yeah, I think we answered a lot as we went along, but if you guys have more, we are here for however long you need us. Oh.
See you, Rosalie.
Thank you. See you next week. Thanks, Debbie. All right. We answer everything? I'm being the impatient trainer now. Just need to wait.
Oh, sorry about that, Genevieve.
Oh, no. Oh, thank you for staying. Sorry about that. I really did not expect this to go anywhere near this far, but I'm excited.
We like added a bunch of stuff because we're like, oh no, it's not enough material.
Oh no. Oh.
Snakes are stupid.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, let us know. And it's almost time for me to start training, so I'll take some more videos and stuff like that. So Bruce is gonna shed tomorrow, so.
And next week we'll dive more into training plans and adding criteria. So just play with it this week. Really simple criteria and pairings. Thanks, Lori. All right, let's wrap up.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Bye, friends.